When you decided to pursue psychology, was there blowback from the faith communities you were involved with at the time? Were there people that were upset you were pursuing that path or trying to maybe clinically approach things that, a lot of times the church teaches should be dealt with spiritually. Like, oh, if you're hurting, like they identify trauma as bitterness, or they identify, these different things as being these spiritual fruits as opposed to being these mental health issue? Or is it something that's a traumatic experience that somebody went through? Did you get blowback from diving into those topics?
Yeah, and surprisingly, not from the places that I expected.
Hmm.
So, I remember when I told my family I wanted to pursue psychology. So, a little bit of context: I'm Nigerian American, and so being Nigerian American often meant you were supposed to grow up and become like a a medical doctor, or an
Right.
engineer, or lawyer, not a psychologist. Like, what is that? So, like back home, my generation, there's a lot of conversation of how we can advocate for mental health and like mental health services, because culturally that wasn't something that people respected a lot. So I
Hmm.
remember telling my parents, and them, just because of how they were raised, not being sure that was like a good way to go. But that was resolved pretty quickly when they saw that there was a field that was literally just perfect for me and who I was. But that said, I started teaching. I'm a psychology professor at a small private Christian university still. And, very grateful for the experiences I've had there. But because they are a very conservative Christian university, it was actually there that I experienced a lot of interesting pushback. I remember I had a student once who was very disaffected by the fact that in class I had said something like, "You can't pray away depression."
Hmm.
And this was an intro to psych class, so I'm just kind of giving an overview, trying to talk about the field of psychology and why it's important, why research in the field of psychology is important when it comes to helping people heal. And I said something like, "You can't pray away depression. Like, depression is one of those experiences that you need to seek support. Oftentimes it requires medication, other times it requires just good old talk therapy and a bunch of other things that you need to be doing with your life. Yes, you can pray, but it's not necessarily that prayer that's going to be the turning point." And I likened it to, physicians, where, let's say, if you have a family member who just got a diagnosis of cancer, yes, you pray, you pray for healing, you pray that this person has good doctors, but you're literally going to the oncologist, right, and getting like the additional
Right.
help that you need. I don't know why that same understanding isn't applied in the mental health field, but with this student, she emailed me after class, and said, "I really didn't appreciate that you said that. Like, in my belief, God is a healer. God heals everything. And, you saying that kind of was like disrespectful
Hmm.
to me and my belief system." And I was like, "I'm sorry, honey, but I stand behind those words."
Yeah.
As a professional mental health professional myself, as a researcher myself, there is no way that you can tell me that all depression requires is for you to pray. Lo and behold, this girl dropped my class and literally left the school. She was so bothered by the fact that I was saying something that I thought was as benign as, you need a little bit more than prayer to heal from your clinical depression. And even a year later emailed me just kind of to check in to see if I'd learned my lesson, because she left the school. It was the same answer, like, "Honey, this is what it is." So
Yeah.
I laugh about it now, but it was so distressing. It was so distressing. But I know it was just symptomatic um, of church culture, and of what collectively we've believed about mental health, and what we've said to people when they're in distress
Yeah.
is, you just need to pray more and God will fix you. And I am not against prayer. I'm a praying woman, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. And it's all supposed to work together. Let me say it that way.
Yeah.
It was designed to work together. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just as simple as that to me.
Why do you think there is that stigma because I remember growing up, like, there was a lot of negative talk about using like antidepressant, medication. I remember, uh, I remember my youth pastor, I just thought of this the other day, but I remember him saying that, there's probably a lot of, because we were talking about demon possession in one of the classes, and he was saying there's probably a lot of demon possession that we just diagnose now. He said, like, and he was saying, oh, it's, think about schizophrenia. He's like, that would have just been this. And it's like, I look back now. At the time, it was just like, oh, that makes sense because that's what this leader's telling me, like, oh, it's probably this. But now I look back, I'm like, that's such a harmful view of people who have mental health conditions or are struggling with these different things. So can you kind of break down, I guess, why you think that stigma exists within church culture? Because it's one of those areas where it seems like we're kind of behind the times a little bit when it comes to dealing with this topic.
Yeah. My first thought is, historically, there's always been there's always, how do I say this? There's kind of been a rotating door when it comes to understanding how to see the world. So historically, there's been times where people have used a completely spiritual lens to look at the world versus a lens that completely lacks spirituality versus, anything in between, a completely medical lens. So for sure, historically, there's been kind of an ebb and flow as to how culture, how societies see the world. And I think with the church, what's happened is that's a body, a community, a culture of people that have taken to a spiritual worldview that has not allowed for anything else. So whatever problem we encounter collectively or individually has to be a very supernatural thing. It can't just be a medical thing. It can't just be a neurological thing. It can't just be a, biological thing. It's got to be a spiritual thing. And then there are views, holistic views, obviously, that, or integrative views that kind of hold everything together. And I would say I'm an integrationist when it comes to worldview, but the church has kind of taken to this kind of one-dimensional view of the way everything works. So everything has to be looked at through that lens. Everything has to be explained through that lens. If it's, sickness, if it's schizophrenia, it's got to be the devil. It can't be, the fact that there's something highly different going on in somebody's brain that, that is causing this mental experience. No, it's got to be the devil, because again, they're anchored in a spiritual, supernatural only worldview, and just kind of haven't evolved, kind of haven't matured, haven't been open to either integrating or entertaining other ways of understanding why the world has its problems